married me all the same. Because thanks to my wealth, you're now much better off than we got married. He should have known better. Alil should have known that his pillow talk was foolish, but he could have had no idea of the consequences of his words and the impact that that would have, and the death and destruction that that would cause, and how it would lead to become one of Ireland's most epic folk stories. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests, Queen Maeve was the famous warrior queen of Connacht. Queen Maeve was known as much for her beauty as she was for her fine array of lovers, most of whom were in her army because she wanted to keep them on her side. Queen Maeve had married Alil. He was her 5th husband, and he had once been one of her bodyguards. Whether it was because he was jealous of her lovers, or whether Alil just had a death wish, but for whatever reason, one morning he started boasting about his wealth. Maeve was having none of it. After all, her father was High King of Ireland, and she was a wealthy woman in her own right. So, to settle the argument, they decided that they were going to spread out all of their wealth and see which of them had more. Because there was more than pride at stake here. Irish law at that time determined that whoever had the most wealth in the marriage had the power, and there was no way that Maeve was going to give that up. So the servants summoned and brought in all of their wealth. They laid out their jewellery, their gold, their fine clothing, and they were equal. So they brought in their animals from the fields and counted the sheep, the pigs. They were equal. They started to count the cattle, and they were equal. Except Alil had a fine bull, a white stud bull called Finbanach, and Maeve had no equal. She was furious, so she summoned Macroth, one of her servants, and she said to him, "Where in Ireland can I get a bull that's going to be the match of Finbanach?" And he answered, "There's only one bull that's equal in Ireland, and it's Táin Bó Cuailgne, the brown bull of Cooley, and it's owned by Dara MacFiachna in Ulster." So she said, "Well, go and talk to Dara MacFiachna and ask him, can I have the loan of the bull for a year? And tell him in return I'll give him 50 heifers. And if that's not enough, tell him I'll give him a fine plot of land. And if that's not enough, tell him I'll give him a chariot to equal the one that I gave Alil on our wedding day. And tell him that if he brings the bull to Connacht himself, he shall have the knowledge of my most willing thighs." So, off Macroth went, spoke to Dara, gave him the options that were there in front of him, and Dara, of course, was delighted and thought this was wonderful and agreed immediately to the arrangement. And he had a fine banquet. And at that banquet, Maeve's men got a little overindulged in the meat, and their tongues got a bit loosened, and they started to boast amongst each other. And they said, even if Dara hadn't given the bull, they would have taken it by force. Unfortunately for them, some of Maeve's servants were listening and went back to Macroth's servants were listening. They went back to him and told him what they were after hearing. So the following morning, Dara's servants were listening, apologies. When Macroth went to Dara the next morning to collect the bull, he got a cool reception. And he was told, "No, you have come here and you have abused your position. You have eaten my food, you have drank my wine, you have abused my good name. You can leave. Go away without your bull, and you're lucky that you are heralds, because otherwise I would have had you slain." So, empty-handed, Macroth went back to Maeve, but she was undeterred by such a minor setback. "Let it be so. If they won't give us the bull peacefully, well then we will indeed take it by force." And she gathered men from all over Ireland, so she had thousands in her army. And Alil gave his troops to her as well, to help in her quest to get this brown bull of Cooley. Maeve decided that she was going to find out how she was going to fare, and she consulted her druid, And despite the fact that the men of Ulster were laid low with some mysterious illness, despite this, her druid told her that while Maeve would return unharmed, he couldn't guarantee success. Yet, the only person who was going to be defending Ulster was the 17-year-old boy, Cuchulainn. So in her fine chariot, dressed in her wonderful clothing, her long golden hair streaming out behind her, surrounded by her thousands of men, Maeve set off to Ulster unopposed, until she got there. Because the ubiquitous Cuchulainn was there with his slingshot, and he killed hundreds of Maeve's warriors daily. And Maeve was starting to get a bit worried because things weren't looking so good for her now. So she asked to see Cuchulainn, and was amazed to discover that he was a 17-year-old beardless boy. She immediately wanted him on her side. She offered him money, she offered him her friendship, she offered to sleep with him. He wasn't interested. But he was prepared to make an arrangement with her. If she were to send a warrior each day for daily combat, single combat with him, he would stop killing all her soldiers. But as long as he was alive, Maeve was not allowed to take away the cattle. So Maeve thought that was fair enough. Surely, as good as Cuchulainn was, she had thousands of soldiers that were there. Surely she would be able to beat him in battle. But again, it wasn't as easy or straightforward as she had thought. And eventually, her warriors started getting fed up of heading into single combat and somebody new being replaced each day. Eventually, she had to turn to Fergus, who was the stepfather of Cuchulainn, and ask him to go to battle. Fergus reluctantly agreed until he got to the battlefield and discovered that he wasn't able to fight with his stepson. So Cuchulainn yielded on condition that Fergus would reciprocate at some other stage. And Maeve returned victorious to Connacht with the brown bull of Cooley. But all was not over yet, because when they arrived to Roscommon, Táin Bó Cuailgne, the brown bull, gave 3 huge roars and challenged Finnbannach. And the soldiers who had returned with Maeve watched in wonder as the 2 bulls started fighting each other, a huge fight that lasted all day and into the night. And the following day, they saw Táin Bó Cuailgne as he thundered across the plains of Ireland, with Finnbannach on his horns, scattering his entrails as he went. Táin Bó Cuailgne eventually arrived back in Ulster, exhausted, and died of his exertions. What of Maeve and Alan? Did they live happily ever after? After all this death and all this destruction, they finally had equal wealth. And Alan left Connacht so that he would no longer be living under the shadow of the warrior queen.